Now let's contrast these two with the rational realist. As he moves up into the positive aura, he realizes he's too far from the truth. And where is always the truth? The rational line. And he begins to feel like that he's becoming very involved at point A. So what's the safety place? The rational line. How fast should I run home? Just as fast as my legs will carry me. So he does what? He goes down to the rational line. But he comes down with such speed, do you suppose he can stop? No, he goes right to point B. Then he realizes I'm getting mixed up in the negative syndrome. And I really didn't want to go down to point B. I want to be on the rational line, because that's where my God is. So then he comes back up and he overshoots it again. And then he gets curious at point C, and he decides to really investigate this truth. And as he's investigating, does he get carried away and go clear down to point D again? Now we say that he is more influenced by this rational line and trying to hug it tight for security that does his past environment average out and hold him on a straight line. Now, there's a real truth here I want to share with you. The rational realist, we said, had no emotion, right? Because he's close to the 0 point where there's not much intensity. But how does he appear on the surface? You heard the expression, the mad scientist? Here's an artist who's very temperamental. And yet, do they have very much emotion? They can't even actually have a relationship with another human being. They can't become involved. Right, here's the secret. When he's moving from point A to point B, now remember, that's how much time is he covering from point A to point B? Very little, right? What's his change in emotion? A radical change. Then how does he appear when you look at him? The guy's going crazy. What an emotional person. Is he really? No, his emotions are very shallow, but he gives the appearance. By the way, can you almost see a mad scientist by this line? You disturb his work. You messed up his papers. You dropped his typed work and mixed up the pages. Somebody let his white rats loose. I just described all the points along here that bothered him. Let's go on to our administrative assistant. This person has sort of an ocean roll type behavior. They tend to want to build themselves up, and then they find something bad, and the leveling effect is from a past average. In other words, they've been this way so long that the average tends to hold them stable. So therefore, does this person with age show more stability? In other words, some men can actually code their wife's crying. 1 through 20. Listening. Cry number 17. Don't have to do anything. All right, let's go to the top, our ideal individual. How much emotion's in that line? Well, watch. From 0, clear up here to 600. Is there a lot of positive aura up there? Is he loaded with emotion? He thinks it's the greatest day. He's just never seen the fleecy clouds quite in that formation before. He just saw that little violet and cried. He's just a ball of emotion. But what does it look like from the outside? I've never seen a more stable man. How matured. No fluctuation at all. Isn't that beautiful? And he has a lot of emotion, but no radical change in emotion. Oh, someone might die, and he might dip a little. 3 days. But it's not going to disturb his life. In other words, he's living. He's got so much going for him that it's just a ball. We call him a Pollyanna. Now let's come back to our rational line. We're back here with our pure and our applied scientists. Now, once they overcome the 7 O's, and they move into the area of the positive aura, we say the minute they cross the line, they're in love. Now, is there very much emotion just above the line? No, but it's still love. And as they continue up the line, we say that our whole need changes from psychological to sociological. And the first sociological needs you have are to be acknowledged, accepted, approved, and to be appreciated. Now your God changes. And you might say, well, we're going to get a little better God now. I'm not so sure. I want to show you the pitfall here. We say that the passive person has no God because he's dead. The fighter man has a God which is material accumulation. The psychological area, or the rational realist, his God becomes his achievements. And we can list these actually for you. It might not be necessarily achievements, it could be doctrines. If this happens to be a minister and it happens to be a doctrine, what happens if you disturb his doctrine? Well, have you taken his God away? Then he's all upset. All right, what if it's rules? Lawyers have this problem because Congress changes the law. And if you had a certain little nick in the law and you were using it for 20 years, you're having a heyday. Every time you get a case, you run to court and you use this little section. What happens? They change it. You're beginning to see that if I use systems, rules, or achievements here, that's what I worship. Like the man who sunk the destroyer. As the destroyer is going down, does he feel loyal to his God? Is that loyalty to sink the ship? In other words, he's following out to the rules and to the regulations to the nth degree. All right, now when I cross this line and I go into the sociological area, I add 3 A's which are completely new to the other area. Now, do people mean something to me? Now, they mean something to me, but I want something from them. And in this particular area, the real danger begins to come, because if a house were my God, it cannot lead me astray. It's going to sit there. And if the book that I wrote is my God, it's in the library. But now my God becomes a group. Do they tell me things to do? Now, if you don't obey the group, will the group give you the 4 A's? So you have to have the 4 A's? Are you beginning to see that if you just move into this particular area, the first 4 A's, could you get yourself in a lot of trouble? Because now we're serving the big they. I heard the other day, say, what will they say? 3 minutes later, she goes, what will they think? And I decided to get a little clever in the game about this stage. And I says, who are they? She looked at me. Looked at me. Did she know? Well, that's a horrible thing to a person. Here they're telling me about their God. I say, who is your God? And they say, I don't know who my God is. But yet, are they complying to the wishes of their God? This always amuses me. How do they know so well what their God wants if they don't know who he is? But will they fulfill his slightest whims? All right, now what if she happens to have a head who's her husband? Who is her God? Is she committing whoredom? I don't go too far in this area. I'll shake some of you up. But we say then that if you actually put allegiance here to too many gods and try to fulfill the whims of too many, are you in trouble? Well, what do I mean by too many? More than one. So we say then that this particular group action makes me, as a person, become a slave to that group. Now, can I lead that group? If every move I make, I have to find out if the group's going to okay it or not, are my actions based on the emotions of the group? All right, will the group have any security if their leader sends out a leaflet to find out which way the wind's blowing to find out what he can do today? What respect do you have for a politician who does this? Well, wouldn't you rather vote for somebody that believed in something and stood up for what he believed, even if it wasn't what you believed in? Would that give you more security than if you run a flyer now and then through the state to find out what the slightest emotions were of the people and then he bowed down to that? Then would you be insecure? Would you be as insecure with that type of a leader as you would be insecure with your own emotional system? So what's the group crave? Somebody who doesn't give one hoot about whether the group accepts them, approves of them, acknowledges them. Is that a little reckless? The next time you're going to move past these 4 A's into the top 3 A's, you're moving from a member of the group to a leader of the group. And what do the people want their leader to be? Totally independent from them. And his decisions are based on what? Principle. And might a decision be contrary to what they want at the moment? Now, what do they want, the group? Do they want the decision contrary to what they want at the moment? Does this give them their security? All right, now let's move up into the last 3 A's, into the ideal individual, and let's look at his structure. His God resides 2 places: within himself and outside of himself. Now, as I go up the chart, when I'm in the physical area, can the God be destroyed? When I go to the psychological area, can the God be destroyed? When I go to the 4 A's or the group area, can the God be destroyed? Now, is there any security then in any of those areas? But when I go to the very top of the 5% and the ideal individual, can we destroy his God? What if you want to kill him? We tried this on a couple million people in the Roman Empire and didn't do much good. In fact, it was the most wonderful thing that ever happened to the Christian church. Can you destroy an ideal individual's God? All right, now, if you can't, how secure is he? There's nothing you can do to his security. All right, now let's assume that he's up here and there's nothing you can do to his security. He's actually arrived. And there's a tendency for him to have how much money when he reaches this place? All he needs. But then there are such things as economic conditions, and there could be a depression in 1930. And he could do what with all of his money? Wipe it away. If he happened to be in the area of the physical person who had a physical God, he would check into the hotel. By the way, in those particular days, when you checked into a room, they asked for sleeping or for jumping. All right, now, the ideal individual, what's he going to do when he loses his money? We say to him, it's a slight inconvenience. That's all it is. Does he really know who he is? He knows exactly who he is, but he doesn't have anywhere to sleep tonight. He doesn't have any food to eat. But he says that's a slight inconvenience because knowing who he is, what's going to happen? It's impossible for him to be up here without having everything he needs. He knows in a few days we'll have it all back again. Something will all work out. We'll have a maneuver here. But we say that the inward part of him, his structure, has not been disturbed. Now watch this real close. This man down here panics and grabs like a man who's drowning. If he were in a prisoner of war camp and they brought in the potato peelings and they had anything to eat for 30 days, what would he do with his potato peelings? Eat them. Now watch, he's in a negative syndrome. All right, here's an ideal individual in the same prisoner of war camp, and he hasn't eaten for 30 days either, and they bring his potato peelings. I know this is an actual true story. What did he do with them? Well, there's another guy here who's a little weaker than him. And he knows that he can get along without the potato peelings, but he's afraid this guy's going to die. So after this guy eats his potato peelings, the ideal individual does what with his? Gives them to this guy. Are you beginning to see that can you be at the top of a positive aura and have everything material taken away without a change of character? Now, some people don't understand this. They say, if there's just so many potato peelings, I'm not only going to eat mine, if I can, I'm going to knock you in the head. If I got enough strength, and eat yours. Does that sound like an animal? All right, now, have I come back to the same premise? Does this guy down here know the difference between humans and animals? And if you were in a prisoner of war camp with him, would it be animals? This guy up here, he happens to know these are people, and even though he has a shortage of all of the 6 physical layers of our spice cake, is it exhibited in his behavior? No. Now you say, well, what if he starves to death? Would he have a character change right up to death? No, he can die this way. But before you ever arrive at the top of the positive aura, do you have a long ways to go? Because we all come into the world right here at oxygen. Do you see little children when they're first born? Do they share? Do they act like they're in a negative syndrome? Then what have you got to do if you're a skillful parent? Maneuver them. Teach them to share. When a little boy comes in and he's a little stronger and he grabs something. I look at him and say, what kind of behavior is that? I think we should demonstrate the laws of the universe here. And take everything he's got away from him. And give everything to the other little boy. He looks and says, what did you do that for? And I says, well, that's what you wanted. He says, I want it all. I said, if you wanted it all, you would share so you could have it all. What you're doing is showing you don't want it. Now, if he learns this early, will he grow to the top of the positive aura? Easily. You say, would I actually sit there and let one of my children eat everything and let the other one not have any dessert at all? I've done it many times. Doesn't bother me any. I don't want to teach them fairness and equality and democracy. Why should I send them out into the world believing everything's going to be fair? That's why you have to wait until you're 40 to start living and find out it's not that way. I want them to know at 10 it's not that way. Then they go out into the world and they can be thankful for what they find and not suffer one disillusionment after another. Right now, let's go up the top of the positive aura. And on the very top of our spice cake, we're going to put icing. I forgot to tell you about the spice. That's why we call it a spice cake. All sprinkled through this cake is an ingredient spiritual, and it's called to give. Remember, I had down here to live, to be healthy, and here I had to achieve, and here I had to love and be loved, and finally I have to give. Did you know, even for oxygen on that first breath, you give first? Think of that. Before that little baby takes his first breath, what does he have to give? Oxygen cannot come into lungs unless there's a vacuum. Does he have to use energy to create a vacuum for the oxygen to come in? Now, once you learn this, and there's a pump here, and I've got half a glass of water. And I'll show you a beautiful concept. 3 days I've come across the desert without water. I come across the pump, and there it is, and there's a half a glass of water. I look at the pump. I crank on it. Empty, hollow, tinging. Oh, no water. Probably dried up. Now I can do several things. Number one, I could just wait and think. A lot of people think that's the solution. Then the water evaporates and I can't do anything. I don't want to do that. I could just drink it. Then my horse would die. And I don't know how far I'd have to go for another well, and I might die. But you know, there's a third thing I could do, and if I was an ideal individual, I think I would do it, and that's to do what? Become mighty reckless. I'm going to take that glass of water and do what with it? Pour it down that empty well. And then I'm going to start pumping. And if you can learn that secret, you can be successful. But can I find a man that'll prime the pump? Very seldom. The average American lets the water evaporate. In some other countries, they do worse than that. They drink it. We're a little civilized here. But we just have not a society on the face of the earth yet that will prime the pump. Now, America will survive because we have a few people who prime the pump. And this is what my search is on the world. I'm looking for men that will prime the pump. And every time I find one, I put him to work. I think this is the most wonderful challenge to actually secure people who have the courage to prime the pump. Now, let's go back to our illustration. All the way up the entire area, do I have to give first before I receive? It's inevitable. Then we say that the spiritual concept, regardless of your religious background tonight, is to give. Then do you have a need, basic, psychological, to give? If something happens, as I increase up through the positive aura, what happens to my need to give? Well, it becomes a little nicer, doesn't it? A little more sophisticated. In the first areas, in the negative syndrome, I only give grudgingly what I have to take. But as I move up into the positive aura, do I worry so much about the immediate returns? I'm willing to give now and wait a week for it to come back. I'm beginning to feel a little more relaxed type. Now, the more you're willing to give without an immediate return, will more come back. Now, and until you understand that law, you will not be able to progress through the positive aura. But once you understand that and have complete confidence, you have to change your philosophy from scarcity to abundance. Now, if you really believe there's enough to go around, then will that give you a little freedom within to be able to cast everything out? Now, when you reach that point and cast everything out, then will it all increase and come back? Now, simple mathematics will show you that you're only going on the earth so long, right? Now, the quicker you start throwing everything out and let it multiply and come back, have you got a chance to throw more out? When should you start throwing everything you got away? Right tonight. But you can't do it if you're below the line. If a guy below the line ever took everything he had and threw it out, would he be crazy? He would have to be. In other words, he would know he'd lose everything. But when you go above the line and go into the concept of abundance, then you know there's enough to go around. Now, how do I know there's enough to go around? A little fish in Cape Cod Bay deposits an egg. Now, would you like to know how many sperm the Creator has set up to cover that one egg? Just in your mind, take a guess. 10,000. Now, how many is needed? One. Is there an abundance? Now, that simple illustration, could I come through everything in nature with it? How many seeds do the dandelions in your front yard have? Last week, I was down at the coast, and I was on the jetty at Tillamook Bay. And I had walked to the very, very end of the jetty, and I looked out across the ocean, and as far as the eye could see, about every 2 feet would be a duck. How many ducks do you suppose I could see? Thousands and thousands, as far as the eye could see. All at once, I had a feeling, how much abundance is there? Now, one place in the whole creation, they go to college and study economics. Now, who do you suppose has mastered the subject of economics? Humans. Who needs to study economics? Only the actual segment of the creation that doesn't have enough. Because economics is nothing but taking a little bit of the pie and spreading it as far as we can. In other words, it's a system of dealing with scarcities. will you be too much interested in economics at the top of the positive aura? In the negative syndrome, how important is economics? It's bread and butter, life and death. At the top of the positive aura, there is so much to go around. When you got a service station on this corner, what do you think when competition builds on the opposite corner? You come home and you tell your wife, wonderful thing happened today. She says, what? What's the good news? They built a service station across the street from us. Next week he comes in, more news. She says, is it good? It's better than the news last week. The other corner, they built one. What's he so happy for? He knows good and well what's going to happen. Business will be doubled within a year. Now, if you understand the concept of abundance, do you love the expansion of everything, and is there enough to go around for everybody? All right, now as we continue putting the spice all the way through our cake, the reason I call it spice is because when you do have a spice cake, the spice is evenly distributed through the whole cake. And to give is the spice, and it does actually permeate the whole cake. Now at the very top, we're putting our caramel icing. And this is the spice of life. Now I use all these words so that they'll be in your mind forever, so you never can forget them. The spice of life is variety. Now, who is entitled to variety? The millionaire with 6 houses and 100 pairs of shoes? No. He has no variety. He's in a rut. The only variety that exists on the face of the earth is when you reach infinity. And infinity is only found in affection, our seventh A, and the only person who is able to enjoy variety is an ideal individual. I'll tell you why. If I took a man down here and said, now I am going to give you some spice in your life, here's some variety. He'd say, help! I'm scared to death. I want my rut. Now why does he want his rut? Security.